Another bit of unfinished business or things that came up on the discussion board or something I thought was important to go back to has to do with the notion of a intermediate conclusion or non-basic premise. I think it's good to have that understanding that simple distinction, seeing how it works in arguments, because of the kind of arguments that we will be dealing with in this course, which are the kind of arguments that I think that we deal with in most of life, that is, complex arguments. A simple argument, let's say, is an argument like this, what's about to come up. Bob is a primate, all primates are mammals, therefore Bob is a mammal. It's a syllogism, very simple argument. And what characterizes it is that it's got two premises which are absolute assumptions. That is, they're not argued for. So we call them basic. Any premise in an argument which is simply stated and assumed to be true without any argument supporting it, we would call a basic premise. And our conclusion here, Bob is a mammal, is the only conclusion in the argument, so it's got to be the final conclusion. It's a simple, very simple argument. You have two premises, which are pure assumptions and therefore basic premises, and you have one conclusion. But what if we made this argument, we just added on to it in a kind of arbitrary way? Right? Bob is a primate, all primates are mammals, therefore Bob is a mammal. No mammals can breathe underwater, therefore Bob cannot breathe underwater. Now, what have we done to the argument here? Well, we still have basic premises. Bob is a primate, all primates are mammals. We've added a third basic premise, no mammals can breathe underwater. But the big thing we've done is we've changed the status of what used to be our final conclusion, Bob is a mammal. Now, it's no longer the final conclusion of the argument. The final conclusion, the thing that we wanted to establish from the beginning, was that Bob can't breathe underwater. That Bob is a mammal is now a premise supporting, along with the other, the next statement, supporting our conclusion that Bob cannot breathe underwater. So in addition to being a conclusion, kind of conclusion, which it certainly still is, because it follows from our first two premises, it is also a premise itself. We would call it a non-basic premise. Non-basic because it's not a pure assumption. It has been argued for. It follows from other premises. So it's a premise, but it's not a pure assumption, so it's a non-basic premise. It's still a premise in the argument, but it's not a basic one. But it's still a conclusion, because it follows from the first two premises. It's just not the final conclusion. So we'll call it an intermediate conclusion, not the final conclusion. It's a very simple distinction and pretty easily grasped. Once we sort of realize, oh yeah, most of the arguments that we meet with in life are not as simple as that first syllogism, the first three proposition syllogism that we started with. Most arguments that we meet with in life are really larger arguments that are composed of little arguments linked together to support a larger conclusion. And once we realize, oh, most arguments are complex, the relationship between premise and conclusion is pretty much what it is. But when we are arguing things in the real world, we have intermediate conclusions, that is, things that we sort of prove or try to establish along the way, but they're not the final point of what we're trying to say. They're things that we think we need to prove, just like a proof in geometry or something, where you need to prove those first 46 propositions in Euclid's book 1 of Euclid's Elements in order to prove the Pythagorean theorem. Right? You could say that all that stuff, all the things you prove in Euclid leading up to that, are intermediate conclusions for the big event of proving the Pythagorean theorem. Not that Euclid's proof is particularly good. As we know, there are many better proofs of Pythagorean theorem than the one that Euclid gives, or at least simpler ones. But anyway, you see my